we went out to the lake. We're running around the lake. It's beautiful, having a great time. We're about 2/3 of the way through, and I hear gunshots. And this guy comes running around the corner, and he's dressed in, the gangbanger uniform, basically. And he's running toward us.
If you guys have been listening to the show for a while, you've heard more than one episode where OC spray got someone out of a bind and prevented them from having to use more force in a personal self-defense encounter. Palm Industries is the OC of choice for active self-protection. We love everything about them. We love the efficacy of their product. We've seen it work. Our actual employees have had to use it in the field against a crazy person, and it worked. They've removed any excuse not to carry OC. This is going to solve far more problems more frequently than a firearm, and I wouldn't leave the house without it. Get one at get-asp.com/POM. Get-asp.com/POM. Alrighty, gang, welcome back to the Active Self-Protection Podcast. I am once again your host, Mike Williver, and I am your favorite former Fed. With us today, Joshua Bennett. Joshua is out of Bellingham, Washington. He is married with no kids, and he is a data scientist. Joshua, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic.
Another email sent in, this time recommended by someone. But again, if you guys don't write in with these stories or referring people, there's no show. So thank you so much for doing that. I mentioned at the top, Joshua, that you are a data scientist, and I know what data is, and I know generally what scientists are. What is data science, and what does a data scientist do exactly?
I like to think of myself as kind of a gold miner of sorts. I take all of the raw data. It can be numbers, it can be text, it can be all kinds of different things. And I sort it and organize it, do math, and try to inform the company's strategic and tactical objectives based on what I'm seeing in the data.
Right. That's pretty straightforward, actually. That makes sense. Although, not a big math guy. Math is hard for me, so I avoid it wherever possible. So you were referred over by someone who's a mutual friend of John, and you have a story to tell that I think is very, very interesting. And you actually are starting a podcast coming up. Tell us about that. Where can people find it? And is it out yet, or when might it be out?
It's not out yet. It's called A Duty to Act. My wife, who we'll chat about during in our conversation here, she's been a paramedic for 35 years.
Oh, wow.
And I am very familiar with. I'd like to say that I'm adjacent to EMS and fire and things, and EMS to law enforcement, and that's because I kind of touch on that. I dip my toes in the water because of her influence, and so some of the things that we're trying to work on is the retention, recruitment, and life as a paramedic, and life as a firefighter, life as a law enforcement officer, and how can we make life better, and that can come in a lot of different forms. And right now it's just about like having conversations about things like how do we get the help that we need, or even reduce the stigma for things like PTSD. How can we maybe address some of the issues around hazing. And when does training become teasing? When does teasing become hazing? Right? What's this? There's that spectrum, and that kind of thing. Just general discussions, and a lot of war stories and such. That kind of thing too. So.
All right, very good. So look. What's the title of it again?
A Duty to Act.
Okay, so look forward to that coming up, folks. Check it out. Before we talk about the incident at hand, when what happened, you had already sort of had a mindset of sort of self-defense, and you knew more than the average bear probably about how to respond to a potential medical problem. So how did you get to that point in your life? So pre-incident, were you a martial artist? Did you train with firearms, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I've been teaching Muay Thai for about 10 years now, and training for about 15. And I do competitive shooting, practical rifle, USPCA, concealed carry. Sometimes we do these like brutality matches and stuff, and that kind of thing. So, and I've taken a lot of one-on-one classes with, there's a local special ops guy that I take classes with at one of the local ranges. And then as a teenager, I was a part of search and rescue and had some very small amount of uh, medical training as a result of that, which really just amounts to like CPR, right?
Right.
But that was out of date and things. And then I tag along with my wife to the EMT courses that she teaches. Because in addition to being an active paramedic, she also teaches at the local community college. She teaches the EMT courses, and she also teaches the train the trainer courses and the recertification courses for paramedics around the state here in Western Washington. And I will tag along, and I will pretend to be a overdosed heroin addict and that kind of thing, and apply some jujitsu as they give me, in air quotes,
Narcan, yeah.
That right. And I'll one time I'd in very much the same style of like Dwight on The Office, delivered a baby because we didn't have anyone, so I was the person there who was just pretended to be a pregnant lady.
Oh, I got you. I thought you meant for real. I'm like, wow, that's impressive.
Yeah. So we just having a good time doing that. But through that, I guess it'd be sort of like EMS education by proxy, I suppose, is one way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks don't realize how much training. I know people that have gone through cops that have gone through EMT school, and it is no joke. There was a lot of information, and it's, pun intended, it's like drinking from a fire hose. Could you inform our audience a little bit? I know you're not a paramedic or an EMT, but could you give them just an idea of how much training goes into becoming certified as a paramedic most places in the United States?
Well, so here in the state of Washington, it's what is it, like 180 hours in order to get your EMT certificate, and if you want like advanced, it's an additional like 80 or 100 hours on top of that. So it works out to like one full quarter at school. But if you want to be a paramedic, on the other hand, then it's like 1,500 hours plus this and that and the other. And it's like the list is pretty long. So
yeah, it's a big deal. So to accomplish that is also a big deal. So I know a little bit about your incident. As you may or may not know, the audience certainly knows, I like to learn about the incident in detail as I talk to you, rather than reading a long email or us having a pre-interview. That way I can sort of react to it at the same time the audience is reacting to it. Well, this is pre-recorded, but they're going to, you get the idea. Eventually they're going to react to it. So walk us through what you were doing, who you were with, and kind of where you were, what was happening, and what led up to the incident you're going to discuss with us.
Yeah. So it was a beautiful spring day, and around here in the Pacific Northwest, when it's a beautiful day like that, we take advantage of it and we go outside because it's so often not. And we headed off to a local lake, which has a 2.6 mile loop that goes around the lake. And this is a common running trail for folks. And I knew that this was going to be one of those days where you go to the lake. It's going to be hard to find parking. It's going to be super packed. There's going to be a flotilla of people on tubes, and they're going to be drinking beer. There's going to be barbecues. There's going to be kids. There's going to be fishermen.
Sounds terrible, by the way.
Yeah, right. And it was exactly that when I showed up. And on the way there, I was thinking, as I'm getting prepared, like, well, should I carry? Should I not? Should I have my first aid kit? Should I not? And I thought, it's such a gorgeous day. I'm not going to carry this time.
Can I ask for a spoiler? Do you still ever think that before you walk out the door ever?
Negative.
Good man. All right, moving on. Sorry about that.
Yeah. And so and also we live in an area where the crime rate is pretty low. Just to say it. So so the likelihood of me running into the situation here is extraordinary.
Sure.
And so we went out to the lake. We're running around the lake. It's beautiful, having a great time. We're about 2/3 of the way through, and I hear gunshots. And my wife has always said, okay, whenever you hear gunshots, note the time, and it'll come in handy for law enforcement later.
Let me ask you this: how could you be sure they were gunshots and not something else? Because I think a lot of people will wonder, how'd you know it wasn't fireworks or whatever?
Well, actually, so it's funny because that's one of the things, because it was getting relatively close to 4th of July or that kind of thing. And so she said, could it have been fireworks? And I said, no, there's no way that's fireworks because of the rhythm of the thing. It went pop, 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 pop. And like, that's a shooter's rhythm. Right. And I thought, okay, well, maybe it's somebody who was out in the county, and I was hearing the report coming over the hill, and it was echoing around or something. Like maybe it's just some Yahoo shooting cans.
Right.
Like, cool. So I noted the time, 1855. Noted it out loud to my wife. We kept running, and we said, well, there's no screaming. It's such a busy day here. Maybe I'm wrong. There's no screaming. There's no car squealing. There's no tires. There's nothing going on.
Right.
Like there's no commotion. And then we get up maybe 20 yards ahead or so. And this guy comes running around the corner, and he's dressed in, the gangbanger uniform, basically.
So like long short pants, or schpants, as I call them, with socks pulled up, that sort of thing.
That's exactly what it is.
Oh, man. Okay. We all know exactly what you're talking about.
We know the uniform, mm-hmm. right? And he's running toward us, to pass us. He's running toward us. And I said to my wife, this is interesting because this guy, he is running and he is not a runner. There's loads of runners here. And he's not a runner.
That struck me as funny. Sorry. He's not a runner. Definitely not this guy.
Right. And especially wearing those, they wear their pristine sneakers, mm-hmm. right? And this is a dirt trail. Right. He's running in those sneakers on a dirt trail. And I'm like, things are not adding up.
Not training for Ironman. This guy's up to no good. Yeah.
No, 2 + 2 = 5 at mm-hmm. this point. And it's like, okay, so but still, we didn't hear anything. So we get up a little further up the way, and at the top of the hill, someone starts yelling, he's been shot, help, help, help. So we sprint up the hill. And we come across a person who looks, wearing a very similar uniform, in fact. And my wife does a quick assessment, notes the entry wound, covers the entry wound. And I start going through the checklist of things that I've learned in her class. Mm-hmm. Step 1, scene safety. Step 2, sort out the patient best you can. Step 3, get on the horn and start calling, and call for law enforcement, call for aid. So she's doing her patient assessment, which, she's done 10,000 times. And I'm focused on barking orders at every looky-loo that's around and just taking charge of the scene. And
be less useless is what you're thinking in your mind. Be less useless, please.
That is exactly what it is. Mm-hmm. That is exactly what it is. And while I've never been in the military, but I have in my classes and other places, I've been mistaken for a retired drill instructor.
Oh, very good.
So I just started barking, and people got out of the way. People started, leaving. They're on with the 911, and they're starting to direct, tell them where they are. That's one of the lessons that I didn't write in the email. Always know where you are. That's an additional lesson to this.
That's a big one.
When we were on with 911, they said, "Oh, are you at the east entrance or the west entrance?" I'm like, I don't know which one is the east entrance. Right. I don't know. And so always know where you are. It's one of I wrote down a dozen lessons that I took away from this incident. That's one of them. So my wife's covering the wound. We're on the horn with 911. She's telling them, she's relaying the information from a paramedic's perspective, mm-hmm. and she's cool as a cucumber here.
Sure.
And she says, "Okay, it's time for you to start compressions." And this guy's, he's laying out, gasping like a fish out of water, blood coming out of his mouth. It's not as much blood as I would have expected, but there is certainly blood there. And I started compressions, and he died while we were doing compressions on him. Law enforcement showed up. They came in. I asked for relief. One of the officers, they had their gloves on, came around, and I said, "Okay, 3, 2, 1, boom." I jumped off. They jumped on. The officer said, "Oh, I have hemostatic gauze in my pockets." So I start rooting around through the officers' pockets trying to find hemostatic gauze. But one of the other officers ended up getting a chest seal onto the onto the wound. And then, and they started to tell my wife, okay, we got it from here. And she didn't move. She looked at him and she just very sternly said, "No, I'm a really good paramedic.
Okay, I like
it. And you're just going to have to trust me here."
Mm-hmm.
And the officers they deferred to her expertise at that point. And it's like, great. And she guided them through next steps. But the patient was already gone at that point. And then she tells me, okay, she calls me JD, and she said, JD, I need you to take 3 big steps back right now. And it was like that calm. And I took 3 big steps back. So I'm, following orders.
Mm-hmm.
And like a swarm of bees, here comes all of the other medics, just everybody swarming around the patient. Like, what can they do? I got one of the other officers. We, talked to him, gave a statement. And then, it was very, very clear that he was not going to make it, that he was gone already.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the lessons that I wrote to in the email. It's like, even if I was carrying my kit, there's like, what am you can't put a tourniquet around this particular wound.
Right.
This particular wound was in the neck. Like, you're not going to put a tourniquet around that.
No, well, you can. You can do anything you want. Doesn't make it a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Hemostatic bandage wouldn't have done any good. A chest seal was sort of the only option, and I don't routinely carry chest seals that I do now. And I have them in my IFAC, but I hadn't routinely carried them in my regular old kit.
Mm-hmm.
And so we gave our statements. Officers showed up. Like, it felt like forever. It really did, and we'll get back to that in just a minute. But
mm-hmm.
It felt like forever. But they showed up ready to rock and roll. Rifles out. There was a Bearcat. I mean, they had all the things. And so my wife and I, we were relieved. We continued our run. Took a dip in the lake because it was a hot day, and then went up to the car and went out for a ice cream so we could debrief.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just like, this is my first experience like this, right? And so we went to a local ice cream shop and sat outside, and one of her first questions was, "How long do you think that took?" And I said, I swear to God, I was doing compressions for like 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And so she takes my iPhone and she pulls up my phone history and shows the 911 call. 4 minutes.
Yeah.
It was 4 minutes. I swore up and down. It's like, it took an hour for the police to show up, and I was doing compressions for like 10 minutes. And it was just, what's the deal? And no, 4 minutes. I was on the call with 911. And when from the time that I heard the shots, 1855, until the time that we were relieved, it was 15, 20 minutes
mm-hmm.
tops.
Seems like an eternity, though.
It like, time was super distorted. And that's when we have that saying, and I hear John say this on the channel, when seconds count, help is minutes away.
Mm-hmm.
That was made more apparent there than, it's like, that's a great thing to say. That's a fun little thought experiment. But when it manifests in reality, it's as real gets.
Yeah, that's why we always stress on the badge cams. If you're a police officer, a sheriff's deputy in the middle of a gunfight, it's almost never worth it to get on your radio in the middle of a gunfight and say shots fired or send me help or whatever, because if that helps a block away, that gunfight is almost certainly going to be over before they get there. Yeah. So it applies in your case in as much as, your wife did what she could. She's not just a paramedic. She's a paramedic who trains other paramedics how to be a paramedic. So if anybody could have done it, it was her.
Right.
A couple of things I want to talk about really quick. And I know you had some points you wanted to address, and I'll get to that in a second. We talk a lot about rapidly and radically accepting reality when a bad thing is happening. When someone is, shooting, like if a school shooter if you're a high school student sitting in a class and you think someone's setting off fireworks in the hallway, that's not fireworks. That's gunfire. No one sets off fireworks. And I don't know if it's ever happened ever. So radically and rapidly accepting reality. From the time when you heard the shots and you realized those are gunshots, you said a few things like, I kind of thought I was hoping maybe somebody was, in the woods, maybe doing some ill-advised target practice or whatever. Did it occur to you, this is not a slight on you or your wife at all, did it occur to you guys to beat feet and go back to your car and just get out of there? Did that cross your mind or no?
No.
Okay.
No, the thing that crossed our mind was just to keep on running. If mayhem was coming, there's nothing you're going to do about it.
Right.
Mayhem is coming.
Indeed.
And we both take the position, and I've always taken this position even before I met her, was it's best to go through your life inoculated to some degree from mayhem, because you're going to devolve to your lowest level of training in an emergency. And my goal, and I think of this as my duty to my community, my duty to my family, my duty to my country as a result, to be as competent in an emergency as possible. And I know most people don't think that way, but that's how I think.
Well, I think this is my opinion now. I'm straying into opinion, but I strongly believe that certain people are just wired that way and other people aren't. And it's only a percentage of the population that thinks like you think, that me or my son, I have 4 kids. I love them all to death. Only one of them is anything like me in that way. And he's going into law enforcement. It's one of those things where you're the person, that at 16 years old has road flares and jumper cables in your trunk and an emergency blanket. That's not normal. That's not most people. I think the key is, if you are one of those people, to follow that instinct and get training. Just being wired that way isn't enough in and of itself. It's good. I think we say calm is a superpower. You not screeching and throwing your hands up and going, "Oh my God, blood. Oh my God, this is dangerous," is a big deal too. Because a lot of people would stand way back and bust out their phone and start, videotaping or whatever, or being useless. Did you point at someone? This is something I teach to people at the scene of anything traumatic, whether it's a car accident or a shooting or someone's having a heart attack. Don't just say somebody called 911. Is that something you're familiar with? Say, like, you point at someone, you called 911. And I also like to teach, if you are had been a defensive encounter and God forbid had to shoot somebody, make sure you tell them, describe me. If you're going to stick around, that is, hey, describe me. Tell them I'm the good guy. Big, ruggedly handsome, bald, white guy, gray beard, black shirt. So they know. So when the police, hopefully the dispatcher will relay that. Because I think the important thing is, if you're that kind of person who wants to be involved, who wants to help, who wants to, be the voice of calm and reason, and as the mayhem is exploding around you, that's good. Get the training as well, because the training will make all the difference in the world. You will fall to the lowest or the highest level of your training. You're not going to rise to the occasion magically. Right. So let's talk about, I think, people's perception of what it's going to look like if you witness the immediate aftermath of a shooting, for example, in your case. Mm-hmm. It's not like the movies. It's not like TV. Because you mentioned something about, I didn't hear any screeching tires. I didn't hear. Those are things that are in your brain only because you've seen them on TV or in the movies, right? There's nowhere else you got that idea from. Frequently, the immediate aftermath of a very traumatic event, car accident, shooting, whatever, can be really quiet, eerily quiet. You ever been to a car accident and the person's radio is still playing? That's the only noise you hear is the radio going on, Q107 or whatever, and how off-putting. And I'm sure your wife knows that feeling. It's very odd. And so don't expect your encounter, your incident, or something that you witness or are attendant to be anything like anything you've seen in a movie or on TV, because it probably won't be. Like people ask John all the time, what kind of gun should I get? What caliber should I shoot? And John's like, I don't know, man. It's up to you. I'm not going to be at your gunfight, and you're not going to be at mine. So, think for yourself. Know where you are. This is awesome, because I have never actually talked about this, I don't think, on the podcast. I don't know if John's covered it on the main channel. when I went through FTO as a police officer, my FTO would every few blocks, where are we at? What's cross street? He would quiz me. And for the first few days, I didn't know. And finally, I got tired of being hazed by my FTO and made you do push-ups on the side of the road in full uniform. So I started paying attention. At least know what road you're on, maybe what road and what 100 block. But in a park, it's a unique setting. So you said there was an east and west entrance, and you weren't sure which one you were at. I mean, do you know that now? If you went back?
I know that now.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm much more familiar with the park now. And I've thought about this situation because it's ostensibly a big circle. So like, if you're in a big circle, well, which way, like the only way to know which way you're going is by north, south, east, and west, or by a major landmark or some such, because it kind of depends. Like, did you go counterclockwise or did you go clockwise?
Right.
Right. And so now I know what entrance we were near, and I know which one's the east entrance, I know which one's the west entrance, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But it's just, and I've been working on that outside of this incident now, as I'm going around, just trying to orient myself, like which way is north right now, as I'm just walking down the street. And my wife's pretty good at knowing that for the most part.
Well, she has to be.
Yeah, because she has to be. So it's sort of like she has an internal compass. It just sort of knows. And I'm not there yet.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It also depends where you live. If you live somewhere, if it's noon and you live in southern South Dakota and there's not even a hill, everything looks the same in every direction, and the sun is in the middle of the sky, it can be hard unless you have local knowledge, as my friend Caleb likes to call it. The local knowledge is stuff like, I know a shortcut, or I know a separate, different road. Google Maps is saying take Main Street. I know to take Third because we'll get there faster. I went to an investigator school years ago in Georgia, southeastern Georgia, at FLETC at Brunswick, and we're out in town following. I joke that we're playing special agent, so it's like a white Impala. Bone Stock is our bad guy, and 5 other white Impalas following him around are all the investigators. And somebody says, Williver, you have the eye. So that means I'm the one watching the car. I have to have an eye on. I can't break contact with it. And the guy makes a left, and I'm like, I'm looking around. Am I northbound? I don't know. Am I northbound right now? Because I wasn't familiar with the area. And I'm like, I'm not sure which way I'm going right now. I made a left from this street onto that street, but I don't know north or south, east or west. And my buddy Garth gets on the radio, and because I'm from, had been in California for years, and he goes, yeah, there's no mountains to look at, Williver. Like, if you're in San Diego, as long as you're not in the mountains are east, that makes life easy. Water is west, mountains are east. But if you're going to be out and about in an area and you're a self-defender, I think getting that, working on that and knowing at least what street you're on at all times, and then being able to look up and see a number, is helpful. If you have a car accident or anything, it's nice to be able to give them an exact location. I think people think their cell phone is automatically telling 911 exactly where they are, and that may or may not be true. So good point on that. So what do you do now when you leave the house? If you don't mind me asking, I don't want to give too much away, but when you leave the house, what's your mindset and what are you bringing with you before you go out into the world?
Well, I carry on body now. So the victim was carrying off body, and he didn't even get around to, the bag was slung around in the front. It may have already been there because when we approached him, his hands were actually full. He had a beach towel in one hand and a bottle of Hennessy in the other.
Okay.
But he had a gun in his bag, and like the incident, and I don't know how the incident took place, right? But either way, he did not even get to the zipper. Right. So, and I've tested shooting from a bag versus shooting from the hip within the context of concealed carry courses up at the range. We do the competitions, and I will do things, and I like to test myself. So I will pack a small bag, like a small fly fishing sling, and I'll pack the whole day just in that one bag,
Mhm.
all my ammunition, my lunch, everything, and say, okay, I'm going to work out of the bag the whole day, and
Interesting.
just however it goes is however it goes. And by God, it is slow
Yeah.
when compared to shooting from a true holster. So I tend to wear a Filster holster.
The Enigma or something else?
What?
The Enigma
Yeah,
or
the
okay.
Enigma. Yeah.
I just
Mhm.
got my first one, so I'll let you all know how it works out.
Yeah, I've made a couple little modifications to it to make it slightly more comfortable. But the Enigma Filster holster has been really great. So I just have it under running shorts and stuff.
Mhm.
And I taught my Muay Thai class last night, and I ran to the class while carrying 4 miles with a 50-pound Mystery Ranch pack on
Wow.
with the waist strap. So I ran there, and it had the holster on the whole time under my running shorts.
For those who don't know, Filster is a friend of the channel. We're good friends with the people who own it and run it. And if you check out their website, I think it's just filster.com, but it's
I think so.
PHLSTER. Did you check
Yeah.
that for me? Yeah. .com. And they have some fantastic holsters. The idea behind the Enigma, excuse me, imagine a really high quality Kydex holster, and it is on its own sort of belt, and there's a leg strap to keep it anchored so it doesn't flop around, and you put it around your body. Not It doesn't get tucked necessarily into your pants. It can be, it doesn't have to be. And the idea being that you can wear anything you want. You can wear running shorts,
Mm-hmm.
swim trunks. So I wouldn't recommend swimming with your gun on. Sweatpants, whatever. But it also works with other things. You can wear it even above the waistline if that's what works for you. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm a fan so far. I haven't worked out all the kinks, but I'll probably hit you up offline for more about that. So
Yeah.
when you leave the house to go on a 10-minute errand, do you say to yourself now, should be fine. It's a nice area. I'll just leave this stuff at home. Probably nothing will happen.
Most of the time, no.
Yeah. Okay.
Most of the time, no. And it's not because I'm being paranoid or anything like that. I'm not.
Being prepared is what you're being.
Well, yeah, exactly. You're being prepared. And this is the thing. It's like trying to strike that balance between being prepared and being in a constant state of emergency.
Right. Yeah. Good
Right.
point.
And you don't want to do that. You gotta just live your life. Right. And living your life comes with some amount of risk. And depending on where you live, there may or may not be more risk.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing that, and knowing where you're going, and knowing the likelihood, I mean, chances are the problem that's really going to be is medical more often than not, right? I mean,
Like 10,000 to 1, the odds of you coming across a car accident or having one versus getting into a shooting. It's a huge number. Anyway, you know about numbers. Go ahead.
Yeah, and in this incident, I wish that I had my gun on me because I was thinking about scene safety. But I kind of wish I wish more that I had my medical kit on me, because we maybe could have gotten a chest seal over that wound faster. Right. And yes, the shooter could have been nearby, and the shooter could have came back to ensure that the job was done. And
may not want any witnesses, by the way. So, and there
exactly.
you are. Yeah.
Yeah. And there I am. And I had my head on a swivel, ready to fight or to dive on my wife. And I felt unprepared without my gun and without my med kit in that situation.
Yeah, running like we talked at the conference. Excuse me, at the conference and at the NRA meeting. John taught a bunch of classes, and he does a whole segment on why you should not carry without a round, or Israeli carry, whatever you want to call it, with no round in the chamber. Carrying without a round in the chamber is exactly like driving with no seatbelt, thinking you'll have time to put your seatbelt on before an impact. It's not like that. It's exactly like that in many cases. Now, there's times, obviously, if there's a robbery going on at the front of the restaurant and you're in the back of the restaurant, you're going to be able to, subtly get your gun out and rack around. Probably. Will the bad guy hear it? Maybe. So that's another thing to think about. Bad guys know what guns sound like when the action's being worked. But John will show you tape after tape, surveillance video after surveillance video of somebody needs to shoot somebody right this second, and they get the gun on. Either they forget, There's no round in the chamber, and they then present a gun that's useless because it's not loaded, and get shot for their trouble. Or they have a problem loading it, or it's out of battery because you messed up the slingshot, the slide, or whatever the case may be. But just like that, having your gun on you versus not having it on you makes all the difference in the world. Being able to get to it quickly. We talked about carrying off body. I was guilty of that for a long time. Now I'm trying to move away from that because I should, of all people, should know better than to do that. And plus, John makes fun of me, which isn't great. So we're about out of time. I want to ask you, Joshua, I know you had a lot of points you wanted to make. I want to look at your notes really quick and make sure we didn't miss anything important. And if so, what was it?
I think 3 of my points came around to time. And one of them is about the seconds and minutes for help to arrive. Another one is about the distortion of time and noting the time. And then the last thing, I've been going through a bit of a, prior to the incident, going through a bit of a religious revelation of sorts, sort of rethinking my relationship with religion as a whole. And as I'm watching this person take his last breath, there's a lot of things that are going through my head, and then I'm looking at it in retrospect. It's like, time is the one resource that we all share, and we can spend that resource. We can waste that resource. We can have that resource taken from us, but you can't ever get it back. You can't get more time. You can even invest it, and usually there's a return on an investment, but with time there is no return on that investment, and at least not in terms of more time, right? And you don't know how much of it you have. There's a little accounting full of time, and so since then, it's been a month or so now, and I've found myself, not that I wasn't present beforehand, but much more present when it matters, like at the dinner table with my wife.
I was just going to say, and I'm not judging young parents, for example, who are on a device from time to time. But when I see like a young mom or a young dad, or even a middle-aged mom or dad, or a grandparent for that matter, at a park, the kid's playing, hey, mommy, hey, daddy, come look at me, look what I'm doing or whatever. And they can't be bothered to look up from their phone. And I'm like, you're going to regret that. You're never going to get this time back. So I'm glad. That was a great reminder, Joshua. Thank you very much. So thanks for responding to our inquiry and being willing to come on the show. Once again, what is the name of the podcast you're going to be doing soon, hopefully?
Duty to Act. And we just want to get a couple more in the bag, and then we'll launch.
Have you guys worked out the distribution, all that stuff? You know about all that yet? Because I can help you with that if you haven't. It's a pain in the butt.
Yeah, I've got that all sorted out.
Okay, good.
We've got a couple of different domains. One is the dutytoact.com, and then our consulting company, PC3. We're working on a tech product called Track My CE, which is a law enforcement and fire and EMS continuing education tracking tech product that we're about to launch. So if anyone wants to check that out, trackmyce.io.
All right. Well, best of luck on the podcast. Stay in touch. I'll probably hit you up for some video editing advice in the near future because I'm just making a complete hash of it. And everyone at ASP is mad at me. And I'm sad. I cry myself to sleep every night. Joshua Bennett, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate your time.
I'm really glad to be here. Thanks.
Alrighty, gang. Welcome back to the Gutowski Files, starring Stephen Gutowski. He is the founder of TheReload.com and the host of the Weekly Reload podcast. Sir, how are you?
I'm doing well. And before you ask, I do remember who was on our podcast this week.
Oh, so very well. I had a note to ask you that very question. Who was it?
It was Jim Garrity from National Review, who is another one of my favorite writers out there in the conservative space. And we talked about President Biden's brace ban bust.
Ooh, alliteration. I like it.
Yeah, I try anytime I can get that alliteration in there. It's good for headlines. It's a pro tip for anyone who's wants to go into the news business and isn't, anyone who's insane to not ever make money.
Right. Yeah, I'm trying to think of an alliteration for that. Gutowski and Garrity's gun. Yeah, I don't know. Finish that one for me.
We're getting there.
Yeah, I don't. gun
That's
grab.
a good start, though.
Something. Anyway.
Well, that implies that we're grabbing the guns.
Right. No, we got to finish it. That's not, it was incomplete, folks. Don't listen to me.
But yeah, it was a good episode. We talked about how there was such a low compliance rate. So
yeah.
And the reasons why.
We've discussed that in this space as well. So over at thereload.com, there are several articles and analysis pieces regarding good old Gavin Newsom, who never fails to give us content to talk about. I'm going to editorialize right off the bat here. I'm not a big fan of Gavin Newsom, believe it or not. I don't know what it is about the guy. There's just something about everything that he ever says and does that I think is terrible and awful, and I can't believe he didn't get recalled. But that's me saying that, not Mr. Gutowski, who was a professional reporter and tries to remain objective. So one of the ones over at The Reload I wanted to talk about was an analysis piece by our friend Stephen Gutowski. California governor's gun amendment is a political stunt. And I think that says it all, but we're going to continue to talk about it because we can't just end with a headline. So talk to us about what he's trying to do or what he's claiming to try to do out in California and what it means for the rest of the country.
Yes, and I don't necessarily mean political stunt in a derogatory way, although obviously I'm sure that's how a lot of people will take it. But what I mean is the amendment itself, which is a proposal to basically partially repeal the Second Amendment and add in 4 gun control policies, which include age restrictions on basically no one under 21 can buy any guns under this amendment proposal. There'd be mandatory waiting periods, although there's not a lot of detail to this, as you might imagine. It's just announced. But so some sort of waiting period would be involved, and the universal background checks. So, essentially extending background checks from being required by licensed dealers at places like gun stores or gun shows to private sales between people who aren't licensed dealers. And then, of course, probably the most controversial bit, which is an assault weapons ban or so-called assault weapons ban to try and ban things like AR-15s or AK-47s. Although, again, we don't have the actual detail. In California, their assault weapons ban is far more strict than just AR-15s and AK-47s, of course, and is probably among the strictest in the country.
I lived there. I can confirm, yes, it was terrible.
So I don't know if he's planning to try and use a softer version of an assault weapons ban, or if he's going to go full bore with California's version of it, which is much stricter than even the 9 other states that have these. But the reason I call it a political stunt is because this proposal has no real chance of ever being ratified, at least not anytime in the foreseeable future. Because if you do the math here, of these policies, the most popular is universal background checks. There's about 21 states that have that, according to the Giffords Law Center, which tracks, gun control laws throughout the country. And then the other 3 are in about 10 states. There's only about 10 states that have an assault weapons ban or waiting periods or a ban on anyone under 21 owning guns or buying guns, at least not necessarily possessing them. But what you need to get a constitutional amendment even proposed is 2/3 of the states. And what you need to get it ratified is 3/4, which is 38 states. So you could do the math yourselves there at home, but 10 states currently have 3 of these proposals. You'd need to convince another 28 states to get on board for this to become an actual constitutional amendment that's ratified. So that's just not going to happen anytime soon, right? I mean, there's just no practical way this is going to become law, at least not for a very long time. And it would take a lot of people changing their minds throughout the entire country for this to be the case.
Yeah, I would say a cultural sea change would be necessary for this to happen.
Yeah. And so that's not, honestly, to me, that's not a super interesting part of this whole conversation, right? The details of the actual amendment or trying to seriously consider whether it has a chance, because it just doesn't.
Right.
What's more interesting about it is the political implications of the timing and scope of this announcement from Newsom, right? So he's a Democrat governor in California, which usually means that when you're governor of a state, most of your days are spent dealing with the politics in your state or issues in your state and stuff like that. California's a very big state, so he has a pretty big platform generally, but for the most part, he stays within the borders. He has been fighting a lot with, DeSantis in Florida and Abbott in Texas.
I was just going to say, which seems silly. If I was a California resident, I'd be like, can you just pay attention to what's going on here, please?
Yeah, and he's been doing a lot of sort of media fighting with them, which already is sort of raising his profile a little bit nationally. And then this is a national campaign, right? It's a constitutional amendment campaign. So it's going to be an excuse for him to go around the country to campaign for this constitutional amendment. So he's out there doing a nationally focused thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you notice what time of year it is or what's coming up in about a year and a half.
What's going to happen in a year and a half, Stephen? I have no clue.
There's a presidential election, right? We're in the primary season for the presidential election, which is, if you're the governor of California, the largest state in the country, it might be something you have ambitions for. And of course, the thing is, there's already a Democrat in the White House, President Joe Biden, right? And he is running for re-election. So you might not, as a potential contender for a future presidential nomination from the Democratic Party, want to jump in against the current incumbent unless his campaign goes really haywire. And so he instead of announcing that you're running in the primary against the president from your own party, you might set up a national campaign for a constitutional amendment to go around and run a kind of shadow campaign just in case, Biden's numbers get low enough or something happens.
Tell me you're running for president without telling me you're running for president. Potentially.
It's kind of like a backup campaign for presidents. How
interesting, because he our vice president used to be the attorney general of California. They're pretty tight, I think. Is that, am I wrong?
Yeah, but Newsom? Sure. But I think perhaps he sees an opening there if Joe Biden is not around for whatever reason, when, it becomes time to decide who's going to be the Democratic nominee. I mean, look, when a president runs for re-election, they almost never face real opposition. And there's a couple of candidates who are
RFK Jr.
RFK Jr. and Marianne Williamson. They're kind of fringe candidates. They don't have any real support within the Democratic Party. In fact, I mean, RFK is kind of running as almost a
independent.
His main appeal is as like with online Republicans, frankly.
Right.
But those are kind of the people who are more drawn to him than Democrats. It's similar to Tulsi Gabbard, who now is basically a conservative commentator. But either way, so the point is, Biden hasn't faced any real competition yet, and he's unlikely to unless his numbers really nosedive to the point where he is just not going to be competitive, and maybe he bows out, or Democrats kind of get to the point where they're like, oh, we need a real alternative to him. And that's now Gavin Newsom has set himself up in a pretty savvy way in this regard, because he's not necessarily running against Biden, right? He's just doing his own thing. And if it just so happens that, the call for someone else, for an alternative to Biden, gets loud enough, he's kind of there with the national campaign already kind of set up to go if he needs to. And if it doesn't work out that way, if Biden's numbers come back up or they don't get bad enough to where the party needs to replace him, he's got a little bit of a more national ID for 2028.
So bringing it back to our subject matter, which is self-defense and firearms, just so people don't forget that's what we're talking about. What is there a gnat's whisker of difference between Biden and Newsom as a potential candidate as far as the Second Amendment goes? I feel like they're both, maybe Newsom might be more extreme, or what would you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, too. If you're looking at it from the Democratic side of things, one of the reasons you might pick guns as your sort of shadow campaign is that Biden is pretty vulnerable there from the left. I know for people who are conservative or pro-gun, that probably sounds weird, right? Because he has terrible approval ratings from the right on the issue, or from more pro-gun people, generally very disapproving of the way that Biden has handled
Indeed.
guns, because he's in favor of all kinds of new bans and restrictions, and he's doing, all the stuff we've talked about before through executive orders, the pistol brace ban and the ghost gun ban, all this stuff. But from the Democratic side, if you look at his approval rating on gun policy, it's very bad. It's it's very bad overall. He's only at like 30% in the last two polls. I think CNN and the AP. That's about 10 points lower than his overall approval rating, which of course is not great either. But and then if you look deeper than that at how Democrats view him on gun policy, he's right about 50-50, which is really bad for an incumbent president and people in his own party saying we don't like what you're doing on guns. And a lot of that is likely because, it's probably a matter of poor expectation setting, because Joe Biden kept saying he's going to beat the NRA, he's going to institute an assault weapons ban. This is his campaign promise. He said he did it before, he's going to do it again. And then he never had the actual votes to do something like that. And he still doesn't. And he still talks about it that way. And so there's a lot of expectation, I think, from Democrats who want to see these sorts of new gun restrictions in place when they aren't delivered. And you have a problem with the murder rate spiking over the last couple of years that Biden's been in office, and mass shootings being a continuing problem that's at record levels this year as well, regardless of what count you look at. I know we've talked a lot about the differences in the counts before, but they're all at record levels right now. And so I think Democrats look at that and they think, you told us you were going to fix this by passing these gun bans, and you haven't passed them, and it hasn't been fixed. So Newsom kind of slotting into the left of Biden, I guess. Policy-wise, they're probably pretty similar, but Biden's never proposed amending the Constitution to repeal part of the Second Amendment. So that's a slot that Newsom is in now.
And plus, you think Joe Biden could potentially be endorsed by Benelli, let's see, the Remington 870. What else? Some of the, I'm going with this? Yeah.
That's true. Newsom's never told people to go outside and shoot their double-barreled shotguns in the sky if someone tries to break in.
Two blasts outside the house. That's if you haven't seen that video, especially the songified version of it, which is pretty hilarious. Go to YouTube or whatever you look for videos and look up Joe Biden shotgun, and then put song in there. It'll be even better.
Yeah. What is, by the way, what is the ASP analysis of the president's advice there?
Oh, it's spot on. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If you hear a noise outside your house, just walk outside. Just shoot.
Start shooting.
Start shooting like into the air at nothing in the dark. Yeah, that's for sure. John Correa said that's his advice.
And make sure you use up all of your ammunition too for those warning shots.
Yeah.
That way, if somebody isn't scared off by it, you have to reload your double-barrel shotgun before they get to you.
I feel like I have to say, our audience is pretty smart. I feel like I have to say we're kidding before we finish up here, just to be on the safe side. Stephen, as always, a pleasure, sir. And as always, you have the last word.
Absolutely.